to the sea. Palestine will be free.
The conflict that has been swirling around Israel and Palestine has really engulfed the world and made a lot of people lose their minds, and also confused a lot of people's good sense on moral issues that in any other context would be uncontestable. There have been a lot of pro-Palestine protests around the world that are of varying degrees of intensity. Some of the protests, like some in Australia, have explicitly called for genocide against Jewish people. Some of the protests in America have explicitly called for an intifada revolution. Some of the protests have included a depiction of a parachute, a man with a parachute that says, "I stand with Palestine," which is a reference to Hamas fighters parachuting into Israel before they killed a bunch of people in kibbutzes. And regardless of where you stand on either side of this conflict, one thing has to be clear here. There's a big difference between supporting a two-state solution between Israel and Palestine and supporting Palestine in the context of the recent terror attacks that just happened. Supporting a two-state solution and supporting Palestine in the context of recent events are two mutually exclusive positions that protesters are oftentimes confusing as they go out and march. And of course, we saw a bunch of Harvard students sign on to a letter that condemned Israel and supported Palestine, to which a bunch of CEOs said, "Tell me who those people are so I don't have to hire them." But what's disturbing me the most out of all of this chaos and confusion is that there is an active push to censor and ban pro-Palestinian protests around the world. In France basically banned blanketly all pro-Palestinian protests. Germany, at least in Berlin, banned a prominent pro-Palestinian group and has taken measures to ensure that pro-Palestinian protesters cannot have their voices heard. And there have been calls to do so in America. In fact, Dave Rubin made this infamous tweet that basically, in quoting France's decision to ban those protests, basically said maybe the West can be saved. So I want us to understand a few things before I get into my analysis here. The fog of war can have a destabilizing effect on moral thinking, because war, by definition, is the systematic waste of human energy towards destructive ends. It does not bring anything except destruction, chaos, and a massive opportunity cost that oftentimes will leave scars for generations. Just ask the Iraqis who America engaged with not too long ago and ask how they feel America. Ask the Middle East how they feel about America, and you'll see that there's generally negative perceptions. Some of that's religious, and some of that has to do with the actions that we did as Americans, or at least our military did, in pursuit of the ghost ship that was the war on terror. That's a different story, different day. So we have to understand that. And so this is a very emotionally tense issue that is making a lot of people who, before yesterday, supported free speech and was against censorship and would swear by you that censorship was a tool of the machine, the uniparty, the deep state, to silence people who are now saying, no, we need censorship because these protests are supporting terrorism. We have to understand moral consistency requires conviction and courage, not when times are easy, but when times are difficult. We have to also understand that there are a lot of misinformed people on both sides of the issue, but especially on the pro-Palestinian side, that are saying things that they have been taught to say by their professors who have an ideological agenda, that they have subsumed the Palestinian people and subsumed the entire conflict in. What do I mean? What agenda? Well, recently it was reported that a non-faculty professor, an adjunct professor at a university, at a college, recently during class told the Jewish students to stand up, singled them out, and asked them where they were from. And when they told, one of them said that they were from Israel, that professor said, "You are a colonizer." And he basically used this kind of language, this kind of paradigm, to indict the Jewish students in the room who had nothing to do with the conflict going on thousands of miles across the sea. This happened in America. And so it's obvious to me that the academy has a vested interest, at least parts of the academy have a vested interest in painting a certain narrative to increase their control and influence over the minds of the youth. The idea that Israel is a colonizer and a colonial state, forget about Israel for a second. The idea of colonialism and decolonialism studies, as is made in academia, is birthed from this idea that you can see the world through conflict, power, strife, and personal experience. That's what the entire idea of a decolonializing is. It's the idea that there are certain oppressed people in particular areas, and their experiences justify them to use violence to overthrow not just the force that is oppressing them, so-called, but also overthrow the norms and standards that force has brought forth by osmosis. So whenever you have these leftist paradigms, you're always going to see an overemphasis on power. So we have to understand a lot of these pro-Palestinian students that we're seeing across America, they probably don't have a very strong grasp of the situation on the ground or of the tense history between Israel and Palestine, and they are simply acting out of moral sentiment. Fox moral sentiment. And this brings me to the topic of this video. Censorship, my friends, is a fundamentally anti-human and anti-civilizational practice, because censorship stunts the ability for individuals to find the truth. And if I can't find the truth, this has severe consequences for my life and for the lives of my posterity, and most importantly, for my understanding of how the world should be ordered, how the government should be ordered, how my entire life should be ordered. If I don't know the truth, I'm going to be subject to false ideas that will lead me to dead ends. And I don't want human beings to be led to dead ends. I want all of God's children around this world to have the ability to flourish and prosper in their own capacities as individuals. And we'll get onto this idea of the individual in a second, because the individual is being disgraced here by a lot of pro-censorship people, and also by a lot of people who are pro-Palestine. I'll get to that in a second. And so I don't support censorship on those grounds, because it kills my ability to really understand the nature of reality. Because the nature of reality is only understood by reason, and reason is refined by thinking, and thinking is refined by speaking and sharing your thoughts with other people. And so if you can't speak, your thinking will be hampered. And if your thinking is hampered, and reason is the faculty by which you find the truth, you can't understand the truth. So on those grounds, in almost every case, I am against censorship. But also, censorship is categorically different from moral righteousness. You see, people are calling for the censorship of pro-Palestinian protesters on the grounds of moral righteousness. But censorship is a relic of the old world. It's an old world force that is oftentimes conflated with morality, but is actually opposed to morality. If you understand how moral sentiment develops, this idea that you can think and contemplate about things that are wrong, things that are bad, and determine which is which, and then live your life according to that. Censorship, as opposed to acknowledging the enabling principle of moral behavior, which is your free will, goes against your free will, corrodes your free will like an amoral virus, and then directs your thinking, directs your behavior towards a particular course of action. Morality is about action. Censorship is about negation. You can't have these two things coexisting and expect to get a moral society. Moral societies do not handle abhorrent worldviews through censorship. Moral societies, which are tolerant societies, handle abhorrent worldviews through discussion, debate, and critique. Not just any old discussion, debate, or critique, but discussion, debate, and critique based on sound premises. But if you have a society of people whose minds are rotted by the digital era, if you have a society of people whose minds are wired in the 60-second soundbite, tweet, TikTok landscape we live in, then those people, by definition, have a reduced capacity to understand moral concepts. We are seeing two things, two twin evils, overtake our ability to understand morality and conflict. We are seeing at first a lack of moral education, and due to the fact that education in the West, especially in America, is more focused on indoctrination and regurgitation than it is actually thinking through sound issues. This is the entire project of that pragmatist, John Dewey, who really messed up American education by saying that education should not be based on sound universal principles. It should be based on instead the particular experiences of people in society. Progressive education, it's so-called. That really warped the thinking of American children and generations that have been raised under the specter of progressive education, and that's really the number. But also, many of us, the second twin evil that we are facing here as we analyze this conflict, is that many of us, in lack of moral education, have something else fill the void, and that is just pure emotion. And we have to be careful to resist the lower urges of our humanity that may very well take us to a place that we need not go. The reason there are so many pro-Hamas protesters is because a lot of the pro-Palestinian protesters are justifying Hamas's actions on the grounds of Intifada revolution, on the grounds of Palestinian liberation. The reason is because moral sentiment has been confused with emotion and passion, and moral sentiment in our current society exists in the absence of standards. Moral sentiments require thought and require consideration and focus to be considered valid. But moral sentiments that don't have standards attached to them in the society, in the particular society, are like an unchained wild boar going through a farmland, going through a community, and destroying every single thing that exists. The wild boar can be used for good if he is tamed and he is taught and he is used as an example of what not to do and how to control your anger. But when the wild boar is untamed and wild, he is a tool for chaos and destruction. And many people's moral thinking is like a wild boar, untamed, wild. It shifts with the sands of time. It shifts with the moments of the current age, the current thing as it's so called by people in the colloquial realms. And that's a problem. We need to return standards to society in the West. Many leftists have justified the destruction of all kinds of standards, whether it be in terms of womanhood and versus manhood, whether it be in terms of gender, whether it be in terms of certain kinds of education. Standards have been removed because they have been called oppressive. But when there are no standards in a society and norms that keep the individual on the right path, then you're going to have unchained hedonism. You're going to have this kind of extreme subjectivism, this extreme my way or the highway, this extreme self-centered focus on you and you only that doesn't take into account the external world. And the moment you refuse to take into account the external world, your thinking in any regard, whether it be morally or politically or anything, is clearly immature. So when moral standards go away, what replaces that? Political power. Remember the idea posited by the second wave feminists that the personal is political? That's basically saying you experience certain things in your private life that are tantamount to restrictions upon you. In this case, the male over the woman, the restriction of the male patriarchy over the woman. And that then necessitates you to dissolve this idea that politics and private life are separate, to merge both together and to act as if your private life is a reflection of political order, to then have laws produced, to then have mass campaigns concerning what should really be a private issue, the transformation of what is good into a aberration, so to speak. And so the fact that political authority and power is the standard of the day, and so many people will protest for the government to do something related to a social issue, as opposed to looking at themselves and asking themselves, what can I do to impact this issue? What happens is you get people appealing to power, and you get this power worldview that so many leftist, pro-Palestinian people believe in, and really many people, regardless of their political beliefs, believe in. And it's no longer about decency, no longer about restraint. It's all about seeking power. Why do you think those protesters are yelling Intifada? Because they genuinely care about the Palestinians? No, because their worldview is marred and crafted by the pursuit of power that happens when moral standards in society are absent and political power fills the vacuum. That's why. That's why. The separation between the private and the public realm is one of the most important distinctions that anyone, any political thinker can make, because it safeguards us from the excesses of tyranny that very well may try to tell us how we should conduct our personal lives, and in doing so, rebel against our conscience. This may seem dense, everybody, but I'm trying to give you a toolkit to work in. Censorship is not the solution to pro-Palestinian protest or any protest. Free association is the solution. Free association, a return of social standards, and a de-emphasis on political power are the three things that can actually help us cope and deal with these protests. Free association simply says, your values are not my values. Therefore, I will not associate with you. This is what Bill Ackman and a bunch of Wall Street CEOs just did when they said that the students at Harvard who signed the letter in favor of Palestine will not get hired by them. This is not cancel culture. This is simply me withholding my services from you. A lack of a positive is not a negative, logically speaking. So it can't be cancel culture, because cancel culture is the presence of a negative trying to take away something that you already have, positive. And so this is a categorically different thing. Think on that for a second. And so this is the way that you deal with this kind of stuff. Self-determination, which is a reflection of liberty, is the best way for people in society to handle their differences. There are people that I know in society, both personally and non-personally, that I want nothing to do with. And what would I be to try to make them think correctly in a moral way by using a force, a tool, censorship, that destroys your ability to think morally to make them do so? It would be completely and utterly contradictory, irrational, and quite frankly, offensive to them as a human being. But far too many ideologies in this world are based off of what you can make people do and not how you can speak to somebody's spirit. I think anyone that conflates what's happening right now in Israel with the recent terrorist attacks with some kind of quest for liberation is a morally confused person whose mind is incapable of doing one of the most basic processes that all understanding in this world requires, and that is making distinctions. We understand what hot is because we know that cold exists. We understand what light is because we know that darkness exists. Distinctions are essential to everything. And morality cannot exist without distinctions present. Do you all understand what I'm trying to say? There are certain ways to handle certain ideas. Now, we draw the line at harassment. We draw the line at direct incitement, which is basically saying, you go kill this person. We draw the line at that because at that point, you are now trying to impede upon the rights of somebody else. We draw the line at that. Individual rights are sacrosanct. They are indispensable to moral life. They are indispensable for human existence. They cannot be violated. But beyond that, simply holding unsavory ideas, simply saying, oh, I support these people out there in this land, without any concrete incitement to violence or whatever, that is an amoral thing. It's amoral in the sense that it does not harm anybody. And you, as an individual, have the right to consent to thoughts like that. It is amoral. It may be despicable. It may be tasteless. But being morally righteous and being tasteful are two different things. And the right has got to understand this. So yes, Dave Rubin is totally wrong, both on a moral level, on a philosophical level, on a political level, on an epistemological level, on every level he's wrong. No, the West does not survive, and the West does not thrive by quashing beliefs that we don't like under the boot of a tyrannical bureaucracy. The West survives and thrives by dealing with ideas that it has not liked since the Enlightenment, how we have, and that is through conversation, through discussion, through pamphleteering, through connection, through interpersonal connection. That's how the West thrives and survives. And the West can also, by the way, this is a side note, thrive and survive by not abiding by forces that come from the outside that seek to erode those foundations of tolerance that have allowed Western societies to distinguish themselves in both progress and morality and civility and advancement from many other places around the world. Poland has this idea that if there's a migrant crisis that happens due to what's happening in Palestine, which there may be, by the way, they don't want any of those migrants coming to their country. And while I myself do not mind people from other countries coming to my country, America, Poland is onto something. If people don't share your values, what use is it to have them inhabiting your lands that are defined by your values? Now, different European countries have different idea of what their values are. France has always been an authoritarian state to some degree. Their entire language cannot be changed unless you have to go through this institution that controls literally the French language. So they've always been an authoritarian state to some degree. But what is important, in America at least, is to understand this, that our values constitute our national character. And our national character is indispensable to who we are as a people. And so I think that another solution to this problem would be to very carefully watch who's coming into your country, impose an ideological test for migration, immigration, citizenship, everything. Not just a civics test, because civics tests are just knowledge. I want an ideological test, a test of the heart. And if you cannot hit every plank on that ideological test, if you don't believe in natural law, if you don't believe in the primacy of the individual, if you don't believe that there are certain objective truths that allow us to live morally responsible lives, if you don't believe in popular sovereignty, if you don't believe in classical republicanism, if you don't believe in reason as a value, if you don't believe in any of these things, you can't come to America. I would support that. I do support that. That is the way that we preserve our civilization against old world ideas that only understand force and a complete and utter perversion of the transcendent, which try to say that the transcendent God is simply a product of my ability to wage holy war against the infidels. That's where I stand. That's my perspective. This is a long video, I know, but thank you all so much who worked with me through this video, who listened to me. I appreciate your viewership. I appreciate your support. Be sure to like this video, comment on this video, share this video, donate to me. I could really use the help on my locals, on my Buy Me a Coffee, on my PayPal, my Patreon. All that information is in the comment section down below. My friends, study history, study philosophy, think, understand that reason is a value, not just a tool. And most importantly, my friends, please, forever and eternally, stay pensive. Bye, everyone.